Having a trailblazer such as Darnell with us tonight, we thought it was only fitting to put him in conversation with others who are trailblazers as well. And so we thank you for your patience. And after we have a brief conversation, we'll also open it up maybe about 5 minutes or so for some questions. And I would just want to take a few moments to introduce some of our conversation partners. Immediately to my left is the Reverend Naomi Washington-Leapheart. She is the Director for Faith-Based and Interfaith Affairs for the City of Philadelphia. In this role, she serves as a public-facing leader, liaison, and subject matter expert for the Mayor's Office on local and national matters that impact diverse communities of faith. She also manages the Mayor's Commission on Interfaith Affairs. She is also a scholar, an adjunct professor of theology and religious studies at Villanova University with joint affiliations with the university's Center for Peace and Justice Education and Africana Studies program. Naomi was most recently the Faith Work Director for the National LGBTQ Task Force, the country's oldest national LGBTQ justice and equality group. In that role, she coordinated the task force public faith messaging and advocacy and leadership development work in faith communities. Naomi shares her life with her wife, and together they are raising a curious, energetic, and future Oscar-winning teenager. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you.
And at the other end of the platform is our very own Reverend Dr. Lee Butler, Jr., who is a distinguished service professor of theology and psychology here at Chicago Theological Seminary. Professor Butler is an Africana pastoral theologian and is at the forefront of how we understand various healing practices from African cultures in the antebellum period of the Americas and how they have helped to sustain and support Black faith and life. His research explores identity formation, African indigenous religions, American slavocracy, religiosity and spirituality, Black and womanist theologies, psychological historiography, and health and healing. He is also the past president of the Society for the Study of Black Religion. He is the first African American to achieve the rank of full professor here at this institution in our 155-year history. So give it up. And Dr. Butler is also the reason why we are all here tonight. He is the founder of the Center for the Study of Black Faith and Life, and he is the founder of this lecture series. So thank you for making this possible. I just want to start off by one thing that, Darnell, you talked about in talking about abolition. Shortly after the election, Dr. Butler framed this moment as a moment of neo-reconstruction. Right? And so I wanted to just have you all to reflect upon what this moment means as we've heard this call from you to reconstruct our imaginations, right? To reconstruct our theologies and to rethink our praxis. So to think about what does this moment call in terms of those concrete, everyday, ordinary practices, whether they be in the life of faith communities, the seminaries, or even in public life.
One of the things I want to say about this evening, since it was named that I was a founder of this Center for the Study of Black Faith and Life and launched this lectureship, is the tagline that we developed for the center was Black faith, Black life, Black improvisation, creativity at work. So that these evenings were designed to be all of the good energy that we have. It has the good food, it has the good drink, it has the good music, it has folks moving together, it has good conversation. Everything that is good, all the energies that really do stimulate life, and good conversation, which gives us a vision for tomorrow and a way of actually living into that future because we don't have those opportunities to actually live into it together. We have a moment here and a moment there. We get caught up in all of the traumas and dramas so that we avoid and ignore the good times. We ignore and avoid the times when we come together and we are at peace with one another. And so we need to take these moments, embrace them, and allow that to be our vision and the work that you're calling us to.
I'm thinking of reflecting on this moment that we're in, and your ability to sort of call out what this moment would become before we enter into it. So let me just say a few things about this moment. Unlike many people, okay. Trump wins, I'm going to say that name one time. And I remember I was out with people, and there were tears, and there was anger, and I felt like duped. I was upset too, but it was not a surprise to me. And I really did want to turn to like my white friends and say, I don't know if we have two different optics, but it was clear to me that the pendulum was going to swing in this direction. If this is a sort of neo-reconstruction, it's very clear that in the moment of what might seem like uplift or movement for anyone who has been under the boot of oppression, that any time these folk are attempting to sort of build, to have collective well-being, to move, there's going to be backlash against that. So I was not, I kind of knew that this thing would happen, that there would be an entrenchment, not just of white supremacy and this idea, this sort of, white nationalisms, but also of patriarchy, which is very much at the root of white nationalism and so much else. But here was my thinking. One of the reasons why I was sort of bothered and unbothered at the same time is because, one, our people have always had to be improvisational. Two, I don't ever imagine a state as the thing that I'm going to rely on to save my life. So I think I suffered less of a blow because I am not thinking about how the behemoth can be the salvation, the savior at the same time, right? I hope you're not hearing me be disingenuous about the movements of our people in terms of securing rights and pushing forth. That's not what I'm saying. But I think about the person that got up here and read the poem about the mom going into cupboards, pretty much, and making something out of nothing. For black folk, lack and our scarcity has always made us more radically imaginative anyway. So I thought immediately about, okay, what do we have at our disposal already? What tools do we have already? How can we live in different and more imaginative ways, pulling from the ways we've already been living? And so so in terms of what it means then to imagine in this moment, it means something like critical resistance, y'all should look them up, has said for decades, stop calling the cops on folk in your neighborhood. You can't, just think about this. You cannot on one hand lament and cry when someone is shot dead by police, right? And then be the first to push 911 in predominantly black and Latinx communities, knowing that it's possible that the person you're calling the police on might end up with a bullet in them or behind bars. Now, what do you need? I know the argument for this. Well, what are the alternatives? This is where collective imagination comes in. This is where collective imagination comes in. And I think we lazy dream, like I said. We only rely on the thing because we haven't dreamt of the thing that needs to go in the place of the thing that's not working. So this gives us an opportunity to practice that.
I also think we don't trust our own selves. We don't trust that the solutions that we've always been using are actually legitimate. We want our solutions to be legitimized in some ways by the state. The state comes up with the best solutions, don't they? Right? They're the state. We trust. And it's like, no, we need to trust that there are other ways of knowing how to be. There are better ways of knowing how to be, and we have them. We have always had fictive kinships, right, that have sustained us. We have always had ways of relating. We've always had ways of making family. We've always had ways of making money that help us, that nurture us, that sustain us. And we convince ourselves that when those ways get diminished or get ridiculed, that they must not be the better ways. And so it is about believing the best of ourselves and believing that what comes out of our imagination is legitimate, is a holy way of being in the world.
We have always had two minds. One mind is what you've been describing, that we have these systems that help us survive in spite of. But we have another mind that very much wants to be a part of the system that is holding us down, which is why when you look at this situation of what happened in that courtroom, how could that happen? It is a sign, it is evidence of our sickness, and reveals that we are, and I'm using this term as my mentor uses it, that we are crazy. And his definition, my mentor being Arthur Presley, his definition is crazy means you have more pain than you have resources to cope with. And so we have all of this pain. We don't have the resources, so we are just crazy, and in our madness, we are seeking to be like that which is holding us down. And so, we, in those moments, are seeking to demonstrate that we are truly civilized. And we're seeking to demonstrate we are civilized because we still long to be accepted as citizens of these yet-to-be United States of America. So until we actually recognize that we are of two minds, we're not going to be able to do something new. We're going to always have the dream and the nightmare. Crazy. She is representing what it means to be a citizen and demonstrating that we truly are civilized people. We can embrace this one who has done us harm and give them that which we were given, the Bible. That moment was not a new moment. We can go back and see it happening in many different situations where the young boy in Oklahoma was embraced by us, where Charleston, South Carolina, same thing. We see it over and over again because we're still seeking to be accepted and acknowledged as human beings because the human being is a citizen.
I say this everywhere I go. We're very good at naming and analyzing the feet that are on our necks. We are not good at naming and analyzing and reckoning with the necks that our feet are on. Now, the thing is, that's just half the work. The other part of the work is after you realize your feet are on somebody's neck, you got to take it off. But who wants to give up power? So I say that as and I say this all the time to folk, like the work is self-reflexive analysis. It isn't having the ability to articulate necessarily. It's good to have the ability to articulate the stuff that's out there and the ways in which we are oppressed, it is also necessary for the sake and cause and end of freedom for all people to locate ourselves, as Mark Lewis Taylor, my mentor, would say, as situated within a matrices of oppressions too. At the very moment in which somebody's feet are on our necks, ours are on somebody else's. And we all have to think about that. I don't think we've been very good at the second part. I don't think we men have been good at owning our complicity, which is why you get some of these black men caping for a sort of white nationalist, patriarchal verb that's moving in this country. You understand? I just don't think that we folk who are cisgender are very good at naming and situating ourselves in the onslaught of trans folk, particularly trans women of color. I can go down the line. I need to. Darnell has to look down at his feet or wheelchair wheel and figure out where that thing is located. And then do the work of taking it off. Hard, but necessary work.
One thing that binds your work is centering the question of identity. Right? So you began with black masculinity and took us all the way to this abolition theology. And so this question about how you get certain groups to see certain things, I just want to talk, I want you to, can you share with us both the opportunities and challenges that come with centering issues of identity in your work? What are the kind of the possibilities and perils?
In our conversation pairs, I was talking about this notion of shame and how in my work, the work I was doing with the task force before I started at the city of Philadelphia, I couldn't get to a conversation about a policy change at the federal or state level related to LGBTQ rights and justice if I wasn't first attentive to the shame spaces that were blocking people's ability to show up as accomplices in the work, in the struggle. So what I mean by that is a person who has, prior to my coming, believed with all of their heart that I am an abomination and am condemned by God. They believe it. And then they hear a sermon or they sit in a workshop and then they're like, okay, you seem all right. You seem like you know Jesus. Right? And so they're there. And so then we're having a conversation. What they're feeling, though, is a shame. Yeah, that's right. How did I believe that? Why didn't I know? Why didn't I? What do I do with this shame? And so I think that the work, we have to attend to the shame spaces. And I say this also as a survivor of violence who sits with the shame of that. Why didn't I do this or that to prevent this from happening to me? Is it really my fault? Why does it still hurt so much? Right? And so that's why I know that, Darnell, you were talking about, I think it was in the other room, how seminary, the ways in which seminary has prepared or not you for the work that you do. I know then that the training in pastoral care, the training in deep listening, the training in kind of unburdening oneself, the training in, not transferring in a moment of care. That is so helpful to me. And I want that to be infused in all movement spaces, in all advocacy spaces, because people are holding the shame.
That's good.
And we have the language, we have the faith stuff, we have the imagination, the spiritual fortitude to help people deal with the shame. What I saw in that courtroom was lots and lots of pain and lots of shame. And the only way the language we have is forgiveness and love, and this is the language we have. But that wasn't what was going on. That's not what was being articulated, embodied there. It was a lot of shame. And so how can our institutions, our theological institutions, our churches, be spaces where we talk openly about shame and treat people as if they are carrying the massive burden of needing to discharge, do something with it that isn't then, reactive, violent. I feel ashamed, so I'm gonna lash out at you, right? So I think that's important.
You've named the shame, and don't dismiss the guilt. They are partners. And as you speak about the importance of pastoral care, of course, I want to rise on up because that's what I do. But you've talked about it in terms of answering the question around identity. Right. And you're saying that much of our identity has been interpreted through the experience of and the embrace of shame. And I don't disagree. That I began studying my research field within pastoral care and counseling. The focus was identity formation because I was experiencing an African American community that didn't have a clear sense about what it meant to be African American. The whole question of identity is one that answers the question, generally, who am I? But for African Americans, because of our cultural formation, we changed the question into who are we? But because of our experience in America, we have to even expand the question to be, who are we without our bodies? Because we are doing so much to escape the body, and that shame piece is another part of that. I don't want to be in this body because I'm ashamed of it. Yeah. So until we actually come to terms with this black body that's in relationship with another black body, that is in relationship with a white America, we're always going to have a problem.
I've promised about 5 minutes for audience questions, but I would like for our conversation partners to reflect upon what an abolition seminary looks like.
Come on.
As we're having conversations here institutionally about curriculum, and let's just, we talk about imagination. What could that look like? What needs to be in that?
So maybe the approach to imagining and to being a type of theological learning environment, a worshiping community that is differently oriented, differently formed, requires us to really wrestle with the foundations of theological education as it stands. That work has already been done. I think it's one thing to name the fact that so much of our theological enterprise has its roots in the nightmares. I mean, we black. Scripture, folks' takes on Scripture, folks' practices in response to Scripture has always been used to, one, define us, to sort of circumscribe our being, to assuage white supremacy, settler colonialism, and so much else. So on one hand, we deal with this quandary of having to articulate, and we've done this. There are people in this room who've articulated this. But it isn't enough to just articulate a thing. You have to sort of build differently, reconceptualize differently. And I'm talking about like everything from the ways that curriculum and who's understood as canon at the center of your curriculum, I'm talking about practices in terms of, pedagogy, not just sort of, curriculum, pedagogy. What does built environment look like that's differently oriented? I see it as enterprising, as sort of radically enterprising, to take seriously that we don't always have to take what we've been given and reform it so that we can make it smell better as a nightmare. Febreze, somebody said. No, that's actually what it is. We're Febrezing white supremacist, cis heteropatriarchal capitalism and turn it into a bunch of things that still is white supremacy, cis hetero supremacist capitalist patriarchy. And I do think that what that might mean as an approach is being, to really take seriously this idea of what Robin Kelley calls a freedom dream. And in the book, The Black Radical Imagination and Freedom Dream, at the heart of what Robin Kelley was talking about was a sort of historiography of arts practice and culture at the heart of movement. And I don't know, I want to sort of de-Westernize, decolonize, reimagine what education can look like that isn't about positioning people so that they can leave a place with a degree to be certified as a laborer for the market. But what if we approach education as an opportunity to help people tap into the reservoir of their gifting, of their calling, so that they can go out and do the thing that feeds their spirits and their stomachs? So if we believe that our job is to give an MDiv so that people can become professional ministers, that's marketplace idealism. That is actually the nightmare that we're trying to Febreze. So y'all hear? It's root work. It's like dangerous work. Edward Danticat talks about creating dangerously. If you want something beautiful and different, you gotta create dangerously. You gotta take risks. And I think that's what we would have to do. Yeah? I don't know.
Thank you.
I think it's also, that means then risking the adversarial relationship to and with denominations. Because, in many ways, I feel like my orientation toward kind of radical abolitionist kind of theology was set for me in seminary. So it was all yes. And then nobody said, oh, but no church is gonna hire you to do that. Nobody said, we're gonna hold you while you suffer trying to do this work within the context of ministry. Nobody's, And so part of it, the seminary can't be doing this work, forming us in this way, and then throwing us to the wolves of denominations, right? Not talking to denominations and saying, but y'all are wrong. You are actually not abolitionist in your ethic, in your structures, So what you need to do is be prepared for the people we're sending you. You need to make space for them. You need to pay them. You need to take care of them. Because I'm a little hurt. Right? Because a denomination could not handle, right, abolitionist ministers, right?
Part of me wants to say that every one of my classes, every time we get together in the classroom, we're doing abolitionist theology. And to the extent that it happens in my classroom and I'm sharing that with my colleagues, we are doing it as a seminary. And as you were speaking tonight and taking pauses from your speaking to say, let's talk together, that's the way we run my classroom, so that students are talking together. And it's always about what does it mean to be free? Well, part of it, for me, holds something that Charles Long said to me some time ago. Freedom for the African American is a crime. And to the extent that we are teaching freedom, to what extent are we teaching criminalization? And so that's what makes this whole notion of abolitionist theology and an abolitionist seminary so important. So I say it's what you identified. It is our aspiration. It is what we are working toward, which is a part of this seminary's history and identity. But even knowing that, there have been some who have not been as committed. But it's still our aspiration or our hope.
Amen. Thank you, thank you. I know there's a question here. Do you still have it? I do. Okay. And I'm going to take one here.
I feel like, this last conversation touched on some of my questions. So I am not a seminarian, I'm not a student here. I am a faith-based organizer because I've had to put aside my faith in order to continue organizing. I was very surprised that this conversation was happening in this space. When I first walked in, I said, I'm not dressed for this, right? I don't know what this is, because the church has been such a polarizing figure in the radical abolitionist movement on the ground. They have policed our tone. They have judged our movement. There are people who were sitting in this room who have shit on our methodology and our analysis of what Black liberation really means. And in our community, many folks feel that the church is just the police for God. And we don't need that. So how is it that so let me go back. I think that there is a fear in this political moment that the term abolition is a theological buzzword. Because if we talk about centering people's trauma, not disposing individuals, and allowing people to heal while in the moment of their righteous rage, that is not what the church is doing. So how do you contend with a church, particularly a Black church, I will name it, that conflates respectability politics with actual Black liberation, that conflates reformism and criminal justice reform and working to create humane prisons and be best friends with police officers with actual deep abolitionist work? How do you stay in your faith and in this work at the same time? And how do you use that faith gut feeling that you have to reaffirm the activist movement that's on the ground? Because we are getting our asses whooped. And the church ain't healing us. They are rejecting us. They are judging us and making us feel like we are trash.
I am like, thank you. I hate that you have had the type of experiences where, and this is your experience, you should know, is shared by so many. And just in terms of my own journey, I actually left church proper as a seminary student. I was suspended from ministry, actually, as a seminary student. And had to, outside of the institutional church, which helped me, leaving the institutional church helped me at that moment, in order for me to sort of build a different faith practice, faith orientation, a different sort of theology of justice that was just. And it took some time, actually, before I felt strong enough and even desired to engage institutional churches again in that way. In fact, when we did the Black Lives Matters ride to St. Louis, and those it was about 500 people with us. We were organizing in Reverend Starsky Wilson's church. Folk had a traumatic response to knowing that they were going to be organizing and having meetings in a church. But let me talk about the crystallizing moment that I think helped, and this could help some of us who are in ministries. Folk literally said, I don't want to go back. Now, these are people who showed up because they love black people. They were willing to put themselves on the line because of their love for black people and felt so traumatized they did not want to walk in a black church. But Starsky Wilson that Sunday preached a sermon that wasn't empty in terms of its analysis. And in that room, I remember this like it was, I think his sermon was called, it was something along the lines of reading the cross as a sign of empire. I guess what I'm trying to say is those same folk that refused to go into that space were welcomed into it and actually enjoyed it and got something from it because the pastor actually spoke a word that was akin to the struggle. Like it wasn't empty of politics. It wasn't empty of radicalism. It wasn't sort of an appeal to them to sort of apply this notion of cheap grace, this notion of sort of reformist ideology. It was a sermon for the time and for the people. So I do think if within ministry spaces, when we can do that, when we can practice that, you might find a lot of people who, like me, left, would return. Because it's like, you know how you turn the radio on and just like, it's a fuzzy state? Like, I feel like some of the antennas are just off. And people think God is in their midst. And I'm like, how? Because the last time I saw cries for justice, it was outside of the walls of your church. So when we can bring those things together, I think we might be better at holding people, holding space for folk who, through the word, might hear a gospel that also calls out the stuff that we know harms us.
And I don't mean to put her on blast, but I do need to say, those of us who have had the honor of being alongside Tanya Watkins in actions around the city, we know that God is doing something extraordinary in your life. And sometimes we have to produce a new church, right? And so we're just glad that you're here with us on this evening. And for those of you who don't know, she is executive director of Soul, and they have been out here doing the work. So hats off to you, my sister. I need to say that. So we'll give another hand clap for our conversation partners and for Darnell Moore. I'm going to ask Dr. Scott Haldeman to come and give our closing prayer.
So looking at Darnell's website before this evening, I was pointed to poetry, and I'm sorry our poets have left, Key and Jay, but to turn to a poet of blessed memory, our sister outsider, Audre Lorde. For those of us who live at the shoreline, standing upon the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone. For those of us who cannot indulge the passing dreams of choice, who love in doorways coming and going, in the hours between dawns, looking inward and outward at once before and after, seeking a now that can breed futures like bread in our children's mouths, so their dreams will not reflect the death of ours. For those of us who were imprinted with fear, like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk. For by this weapon, this illusion of some safety to be found, the heavy-footed hoped to silence us. For all of us, this instant and this triumph, we were never meant to survive. And when the sun rises, we are afraid it might not remain. And when the sun sets, we are afraid it might not rise in the morning. When our stomachs are full, we are afraid of indigestion. When our stomachs are empty, we are afraid we may never eat again. When we are loved, we are afraid love will vanish. When we are alone, we are afraid love will never return. And when we speak, we are afraid. We are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So, it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive. In this spirit, in the spirit of Shelby Rooks, in the spirit of Darnell Moore, in the spirit of Audre Lorde, in the spirit of our foremothers and forefathers, in the spirit of all that is holy, let us go. Let us speak, that all may survive. Go in peace, brothers and sisters.